Hey, everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Code Reds podcast on the CLNS Media Network. My pleasure to welcome back Tommy Thrall. You know him, of course, as the voice of the Cincinnati Reds on the Cincinnati Reds radio network, the flagship, of course, being WLW here in Cincinnati, as well as the Reds Hot Stove show that would air throughout the winter, different days, Tommy, is that right?
Mostly Tuesdays, a few Wednesdays sprinkled in too.
Depending on the college basketball,
right,
with regard to Xavier and Cincinnati. But you can certainly get your baseball fix in with Tommy Thrall, who does a great job hosting that program. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to start off hot here, Tommy, and ask you, what has been the highlight of your offseason so far?
Oh, boy, highlight of the offseason. Trip to Napa was pretty nice. That was fun. That was right out of the gate. So right after the season ended, went out to Napa, tasted a ton of great wine, had a great trip out there. Also went to Puerto Rico, spent some good time with the family over the holidays. So a little bit of travel, but a lot of relaxing as well. So it's hard to pick out one thing, but it's been a good offseason. Ready to get baseball going, though.
I think you, like me, like pretty much everyone who follows or covers the Cincinnati Reds, pretty excited when the Reds started this offseason hot, you could say, signing Terry Francona as their new skipper, replacing, of course, David Bell, who was let go after just at the end of the 2024 season. Look, I worked with Terry in Boston, covered him for his whole 8-year tenure, in Boston. A couple of World Series thrown in there for good measure. He is going to raise the bar. I think we all know that. We all anticipated that when he was hired. I think some of his messaging in the offseason, certainly to you on the Hot Stove show on WLW, has even enforce that thought even more. And I want to get your impression, Tommy, what you think Terry Francona's hiring by the Cincinnati Reds does for the expectations going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, you ask about the highlight of the offseason. I think the baseball highlight of the offseason was certainly the hiring of Tito. Instantly, it just energized everybody. I think from that point forward, there were a lot of people around the organization that were ready to just go ahead and lace him up right then. Let's get after it. So I think he's, excuse me, you talk about the messaging. This is a guy that everything you hear about him, the conversations that have been had through coaches or players, the one thing that stands out the most is all he cares about is winning. That's it. It's as simple as that. Whatever it takes to win, that's what he's going to do. And that to me is the biggest key of all of this. Everything he has in mind that he wants to do, it comes back to helping this team win. And that's it. That's the bottom line. He's certainly one of these guys that just has a presence about him. When you're in the room, you hear him talk, shoot. I'm 40 years old. I'm ready to lace him up and see if I can go out there and play for him. I mean, that's just what he is. That's who he is. He's just a guy that makes you want to run through a brick wall for him. And I think that's a big part of why he's had so much success as a manager at the big league level.
The biggest question I get, Tommy, is how will the Reds play differently? How will we notice a difference with the Reds starting March 27th against San Francisco at Great American?
Well, I think it's a fair question, and I think it's simple. I think they're going to do the little things that it takes to win baseball games. There were a lot of things that slipped through the cracks in years past. I think that's going to be cleaned up. I think that is the number one focus. Just do the little things, and this team would have a lot more success. There were a lot of runs that were left on the board and a lot of runs that were put on the board that were allowed that probably shouldn't have been, whether it's not turning a double play when you had a golden opportunity to get a double play. Maybe it's not having a great approach at the plate when you've got a runner at third and nobody out, leaving runs out there in crucial spots, things like that. A mental error, whether it's on the bases or just a lapse of concentration in the field that leads to an error and runs. I think those are the things that'll be cleaned up. I think you'll just see a much more crisp brand of baseball, and a team that does all the little things that it takes to win a baseball game.
One thing that I'm wondering as we talk about Terry Francona and how he's going to handle the roster, how he's going to handle the way the Reds play 162 games, how they play from day to day. There's a lot to be determined. Going into this season, I can only think of two positions that are pretty much set in stone, and maybe even one that, you can make an argument he could be moved. That Ellie De La Cruz at shortstop, we would expect to be the way it's going to be March 27th against the Giants. Tyler Stevenson, the catcher, to start the season, the regular catcher. Otherwise, what else is for certain? I don't think there are a lot of positions for certain in terms of how this lineup is going to look from day to day.
I think there's a lot of guys that are going to be in the lineup. It's where they're going to play on a day-to-day basis that is uncertain. I'm with you. When you said there's probably only two spots that are guaranteed on opening day to be there, those are the two I thought of. Ellie, of course, at short, and Tyler behind the plate. I think Matt McLain will be the second baseman on a everyday basis. He might move around a little bit just because he has that flexibility, but I think he's going to be your regular second baseman. The reason I think that is because I think he makes Ellie better at shortstop. I think when you have him in the lineup and you have those two guys playing side by side, they are really good for each other. I think Matt is really good for Ellie. Therefore, I think you want those two guys together as much as you can up the middle. Gavin Lux is going to play some second base. There's no doubt.
Right.
He's probably going to play some third base as well. He's going to move around a little bit. He'll play some outfield. Another guy would throw out there, there's probably two others that are a little bit more solid, but on that next level down. I think TJ Friedl is going to be your everyday center fielder. I think, where he was at the end of last year, getting over the leg injuries, the speed came back for him a little bit, which I think will help the defense come back. Having his legs under him, I think will help him offensively as well. He's just one of those guys that you want on a good team because he is a winning type of player. All he cares about is winning. I mean, he is everything I've gathered about Tito. TJ Friedl would be his type of guy.
I would agree with that 100%, Tommy. Not to, interrupt you here.
Yeah.
I would have assumed at the end of last year, at the end of 2024, that TJ Friedl was set in stone pretty much as the center fielder. But then when you acquire Gavin Lux, and I still hear the rumblings about Matt McLain moving possibly to center field or somewhere in the outfield, it just starts my head thinking, and I'm like, how are you going to move and arrange all of these pieces if you're Terry Francona? That's what I find fascinating about what spring training is going to bring.
Yeah, I think that's the other part of spring training is you've got guys that are going to see where they can play. So you've got a month for guys to be able to figure out, all right, can I play some left field? Can I play some right field? Play third? All those things. So you've got some time to figure that out. I think that's what we'll see in spring training. Guys move around. If you couldn't move TJ Friedl somewhere, maybe you move him to right field, maybe you move him to left field. But then what do you do with Spencer Steer? I think he's kind of settled in pretty nicely to left field. If you were to pick a guy to have a bounce back year, I think Spencer Steer is definitely going to be one of those guys.
Yep.
Matt McLain's obviously the easy answer because he didn't play last year. But guys that played last year that had a tough year, I think Spencer Steer is a prime candidate to have a really big bounce back season. This guy, I firmly believe can hit. And not only that, I would go as far as saying he might be the best hitter on this team. Now, he's got to prove that. But because this organization has so much faith in him, he's going to be in there on an everyday basis. And I think left field's the best place he fits in. All that is to say, I just don't know why you want to mess around too much with moving a guy like Matt McLain to center field and
right.
Moving TJ Friedl somewhere else. I think you have enough flexibility that you don't have to move too many guys more than you absolutely have to, which is, I think, a good thing. I think you want guys to be comfortable. We'll see how it all plays out and how Tito feels about it once we get into it. But I think the versatility is a good thing, so that way you can certainly match up your lineup how you want against lefties and righties.
Speaking with Tommy Thrall, play-by-play voice of the Cincinnati Reds on the Reds Radio Network. What about Christian Encarnacion-Strand? What are you hearing, Tommy, about his readiness for this season? Obviously, he comes off a wrist injury. We had another athlete in town demonstrate that he can come back from a wrist injury and perform at a pretty high level. And obviously, to swing a bat with the amount of force that he does at the major league level, I think Christian Encarnacion-Strand is somebody the Reds are definitely counting on as providing some right-handed power this year.
He's a guy that I would say I was pretty skeptical of until I had some other conversations with some folks around the organization. And look, I can have my opinions, and if somebody can convince me otherwise, I'm all for it. I love to be talked out of how I'm thinking about something. So he's kind of one of those guys that if you would have asked me 2 months ago, I would have thought maybe don't count on him. Now I'm after talking to a few people, realizing that maybe he was hurt a little bit more last year than people, or than he let people believe, that he was, even when he was in there playing through some things, that makes me believe that maybe he will be all right this year. That said, he's got to earn his way back onto this team. I don't know that first base is even the DH role is given to him, but if he comes into spring training, he's healthy, has a nice spring, and looks good at the plate, he makes the team. But I don't think that's something that'll be given to him. I think Noelvi Marte is kind of in the same boat as well. I don't think his spot is guaranteed either. But I think Encarnacion-Strand, when you look at the fact that he was hurt probably more than he let on, and the fact that he is hit everywhere he's been, he's just kind of one of those guys that's just a natural hitter. He's another one that I would say is a good candidate for a bounce back year. And I certainly hope so, because if he's at his best, like you said, this is a guy with some serious power. I think he got a little bit better over at first base too, so he can give you a nice steady option over there. And like we talked about, it's kind of nice to have guys that you can pencil in a certain spot in the lineup every day, both offensively and defensively. So yeah, I'm excited to see what he brings to the table this year.
All right, I'll give you a list of 7 names that have been added to the roster in the offseason. Of course, we said goodbye to Jonathan India for one of the new players. That would be right-handed pitcher Brady Singer, who figures to slot in 4th or 5th in the starting rotation, I think. Tommy, would you say that's safe to say? You can just nod if you want.
Yeah, I think he might even be 3rd. And the reason I say that is just because that way you have a guy that you can count on every 5th day right in the middle of your rotation. He's a pretty good pitcher. Make no mistake about it. He's one of these guys that's a winner. Helped the Royals to the playoffs last year. And that's kind of the theme of the guys that were brought in. They're all winning players. Brady Singer's no different. Yeah, probably 3rd or 4th in the rotation if I had to bet.
Gavin Lux is another one of those winners, Tommy, for sure. To me, he's probably the highest profile name that was brought in the offseason, signing with the Reds. He is going to play a number of different positions. We've already touched on that. Left-handed reliever Taylor Rogers, outfielder Austin Hayes, catcher Jose Trevino to slot in there behind Tyler Stevenson, and Rule 5 pick infielder Cooper Bowman from the Athletics. Of all of those names, which ones pop off the page the most to you?
Gavin Lux, Taylor Rogers, I would say a little bit too. I was kind of out having dinner when I found out that the Reds got Taylor Rogers, and that one caught my eye. I thought, whoa, all right. I mean, he's a bona fide big league reliever. I mean, this is a guy that will really help shore up the bullpen, an area where they probably came into the offseason with their biggest need. So I think that's a huge boost for the bullpen. Another left-handed arm out there, but he can get right-handers out. In fact, last year got right-handers out better than he did left-handers. So he's a nice addition. Other than that, Gavin Lux, the Brady Singer trade, I thought was a brilliant trade. I really thought that was One of those trades that has a chance to be extremely mutually beneficial for both teams. The Royals had a need for a guy that could get on base at the top of the order and play some second base. And the Reds needed to add to their starting rotation and kind of solidify it with a guy that's proven to give you the innings and make the start every fifth day. He does that. That the Reds needed somebody that could solidify the rotation that you could count on to make the starts. And outside of Brady Singer, they haven't had anybody that's made every start all year. So that's why I think he's going to be a huge boost for this team, and I really like that. When the rumors started circulating about that trade, instantly I was like, absolutely, definitely. And then it came to fruition, and I think he's going to be a huge pickup and a guy that, again, he's a grinder, he's a winner, and I think him and Jonathan India have a lot of similar traits. Singer's just on the mound.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. One thing that impressed me about what Nick Krall had to do in this offseason is the fact that he had to work around a moving target, the moving goalposts, if you will, of the offseason budget. And, you are someone who's intimately aware of the broadcasting dynamic and the income that is brought in. Now, the radio side of things, pretty stable when it comes to WLW. I think we all know that. But in terms of the TV side, when Bally and FanDuel left the picture early in the offseason, Nick Krall didn't know exactly what his budget was going to be. And then the Reds decided to rework that deal into a one-year deal with FanDuel. Everybody, I think, knows that now. How do you think the Reds and Nick Krall navigated that very tricky course in the offseason, leading to, as we said, 7 new faces on the Reds?
I think Nick does an incredible job of working around the financial constraints that comes with being a small market team, period. I think he does a good job of that year in and year out. And I really think he puts together teams that, for the most part, have a chance to have some success if everything falls into place with like you say, the constraints that he's got. So that said, I thought he's had a really good offseason. For one, I mean, look, we talk about the players, but I think Nick Krall and Brad Metter went out and got the one manager that can make as big of an impact as any player you could make. I
100% agree with that.
Well, I know we're in a day and age where, maybe the managers don't get the credit they deserve, or maybe sometimes they're given too much credit or too much blame. There's a reason Terry Francona has won everywhere he's been, except Philadelphia. There's a reason he's had the success that he's had at the big league level, and he hasn't always had great teams. So the fact that they were able to get a guy like him, I think, was a huge step in the right direction. Now you go out, Nick's added all the pieces that you just mentioned. They're all upgrades over the guys that they would replace.
Right.
So this was a team I already thought was a pretty talented team. By and large, if you ask me, I think they underperformed last year a little bit. Now, granted, they had some serious injuries, but still, I thought they were more talented than what they finished. So just with the guys that they already had coming back, I thought they were going to be good enough to compete as guys continue to get better in their big league careers. Now you add in these pieces that they have. I think Nick's done a tremendous job. Are they all going to work out? Probably not. That's just the way the game works, but he certainly created some flexibility.
Here's the deal. In this day and age, with a manager like Terry Francona, you want to empower Tito so that he doesn't feel hamstrung at various positions on the field. I think what Nick Krall and Brad Meador went out and did is they gave Tito multiple options at multiple positions so that if you run into a situation like the Reds had on numerous occasions through the 2024 season, I don't think Tito feels at all that he has to stick with a player if it's not working out. the irony of that, of course, is in Boston, he developed a reputation with staying with a player, a superstar player, albeit, but a superstar player for a long period of time to let him work out of, let's say, a slump, a prolonged slump. Here in Cincinnati, I think he's been empowered to do maybe even the opposite. If things are not working out and he senses that quickly, he can make changes.
I think the fact that you talked about the superstar in Boston, there's always a chance. Every situation is different. And I think that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of a guy like Tito. He knows when it's the right time to stick with a guy and when it's time to move on and make a change. And that comes from how much time he spent in the game, the great feel that he has for the game of baseball. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the front office gives him that luxury to make the decisions that he needs to make to win games. And I just think he has a tremendous feel for that. That it kind of comes back to the bullpen. What's the most important thing about having and managing a good bullpen? It's having a good feel for your relievers. And he has a tremendous feel for that. He's even talked about it. He goes, look, if I need to leave a starter out there a little bit longer than maybe I would ordinarily, I'm going to do it early in the year to see if they can get through it.
Right.
Maybe it costs you a few wins early in the year, but now you have a better idea of what that guy's capable of once you get down the stretch or later in the season. And I think those are important things that he understands. And he's going to have to do some of that too, to kind of get a feel for his pitchers. And it goes in line with what you're saying about position players. If a guy's going through a slump, you got to let him fight through it to some extent, or after a while you figure out it's time to move on. But having a feel for that is a huge piece of it.
How are the Reds and Terry Francona going to handle Graham Ashcraft? I find this storyline, Tommy, fascinating heading into spring training, because I had Derek Johnson, pitching coach, on this very podcast a couple of weeks ago. And he told me, look, my attitude is that Graham is going to start out competing for a starting position in spring training. Where it goes from there, I have no idea. But right now, DJ anticipates Graham Ashcraft opening spring training competing for a starting job.
Well, let me put it this way. If you can have a guy like that start, by all means, you want him to start. He's a pretty filthy pitcher. He is nasty. This difficulty that he has had getting through an order a third time, it's real. And as a starter, I think you genuinely need to be able to get through an order 3 times. I think the Reds are in a position where they're going to have enough guys that are capable of that. And I think they've got a pretty deep starting rotation right now. Their biggest need is going to be in the bullpen. He's the only guy of the group of starters that they have right now that I could see being a really good fit in the bullpen. But all that being said, I agree with what DJ said. Of course, you can't disagree with the guy. Nobody has more knowledge of the situation than him. But I think that's right. You have to let a guy like that start until he shows you that he can't. I think you owe that to the player as well. If Graham comes out, figures out a way to be an effective starter, he stays in the rotation. He stays a starter. But I think in the end, we'll probably see him in the bullpen. And if that's the case, I think he becomes a huge, huge asset in the bullpen.
I would agree. And not only in the bullpen, in the back end of the bullpen, perhaps even high leverage situations, just because his stuff is so filthy. And, you want someone like that who's able to get guys out with filthy stuff on a moment's notice, no matter if he's right-handed, left-handed, switch hitter, it doesn't matter.
Got a chance to have a pretty strong back end of the bullpen. I know we'd all like to see Alexis Diaz be a little more lights out and dominant in closing games out. I think everybody involved in the Reds would like to see that, fans especially. But at the end of the day, more often than not, he gets the job done, and he's been a pretty effective closer now for the last few years. In fact, he's been one of the most effective closers in the game when you're just talking about converting save opportunities. So you got a guy back there that knows how to do it. He's done it. Then you have Tony Santillan. When the Reds brought him up last year, he's been in the big leagues before. He was really, really good. He's got a chance to be a piece of the back end of the bullpen. And if you factor in Graham Ashcraft in that too, you could have a pretty nasty three-headed monster in the 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Well, and then you have 3 lefties, which really gives Tito some versatility there. And then you have Nick Martinez, Tommy. And again, another fascinating, versatile piece that I think Nick Krall has done a great job in terms of at least structuring his roster, his pitching staff for the coming season. There's a lot of versatility built into that pitching staff this year. And it's interesting to me, Tommy, and I don't know if it struck you the same way. As great a breakout season as Hunter Green had last year, he was an all-star. He was not the BBWA Cincinnati chapter most valuable pitcher. It was Nick Martinez. What did you think of that?
Well, I think it's accurate. The reason I say that is because Nick was able to do both things so effectively. He gave you really good starts at the end of the year when this team needed somebody to slot into the rotation, and he became probably the most reliable starter that they had. Out of the bullpen, he was excellent. He struggled in a starting role early in the year.
Right.
And I don't know what to make of that. Some of that might be coincidence. Some of it might have been bad luck. I don't know. And that was just kind of one of those weird baseball anomalies where you can say he had trouble in the first inning, but and the numbers back it up. But why? And there's no explanation of why he struggled. But once he moved back into the rotation after spending a majority of the year in the bullpen, he was brilliant. And because of that versatility, I think that is why he was the Reds' most valuable pitcher, because I agree with that. I think he was, because of all of the different roles that he took on last year. I don't know that it's going to be a whole lot different this year. I think he might be in a very similar situation. He's another guy. You talk about Graham Ashcraft being a starter that could be suitable for the bullpen. You give the money that the Reds gave to Nick Martinez, and I think you think, well, you're not paying that much money for a reliever. You're paying that much money for a reliable pitcher that makes your team better. He does that, whether he's starting or relieving. So I think he goes where the team's need is. And I think the thing that makes him even more valuable, and this is kind of one of those, under the radar type of things, it's an intangible that you can't quantify. He is truly willing to do whatever this team wants him to do. If they want him to pitch out of the bullpen, fine. He doesn't have a problem with that at all. He'll go pitch in relief. If they want him to start, absolutely. Run me out there. Happy to do it every 5th day. And he's going to be effective no matter where you put him. That, to me, is his most valuable asset, is the willingness to do whatever they want him to do and the ability to go back and forth. That's not easy either. When you're used to relieving and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now we need you to start and give us at least 5 innings. Not many guys can do that. He did it, and he did it a lot, and he did it very well. Incredible.
Is Rhett Lauder on this pitching staff to start the season?
Oh, I think absolutely.
I would think so, but the reason I bring this question up is at some point you're going to run into a numbers game with your starting staff. And I don't think they envision having Rhett Lauder in the bullpen. I mean, not until maybe the postseason, but that's a different discussion. But to start the season, Rhett Lauder to me is clearly one of the 5 best starters in terms of stuff that the Reds have. But at some point, you're talking about Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Andrew Abbott, who we haven't even spoken about, Brady Singer, Graham Ashcraft. I don't know if you want to throw Nick Martinez in there or not. I don't know if you want to throw Brandon Williamson in there or not. But, at some point, you're going to run out of slots to put a guy even as talented as Rhett Lauder in. And he's got options remaining. That's why I ask.
If you have to start Rhett Lauder in AAA, you're in a really good spot from a starting pitching standpoint. There is a chance that could happen. I don't think it will. I think he'll be in the rotation to start the season. But if that's the case, you're going to take that. Now the key for that is not losing a guy like Rhett Lauder. And what I mean by don't lose him is I hope he doesn't, have a difficult time going back to Louisville after having all the success that he had last year and kind of lose his focus a little bit and can't get it back. That's the part that I always fear when you run into a situation like that. But organizations would tell you, we'd much rather deal with that than not have enough talent. So
Correct.
all that said, I truly believe that he will be in the rotation when the season begins, but that means you're going to have to do something with Nick Martinez. And does that mean he's going to start the year in the bullpen, or it means somebody's hurt too, which you don't
Could always can
see
happen.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Want to ask you about in talking about the Hot Stove League on WLW, or the Hot Stove Show on WLW. You often host with one of my favorite podcaster there is, and that's Jim Day. How has it been working with Jim and the stories you guys tell on the air? I think Jim is, honest to God, and I've told him this before, one of the best storytellers in baseball in terms of the job he has as a field reporter.
Oh, he's great. It's fun because he always has the insight into guys that a lot of people don't have and nobody else can get. And he's able to draw that out of the guests that we have on. He's just, it's fun to work with him. First of all, Jim and I are friends.
Right.
We spend a ton of time together during the season. We sit next to each other on the plane as we crisscross the country all summer long. We have dinner together every day. We have dinner together a lot of times on the road. We spend a lot of time together, and because of that, I think we have a good rapport, and hopefully that comes out in the show. We really enjoy working together, and it's kind of fun to be able to sit there and talk baseball with them for an hour every day in the off season.
It is, and it's a great listen. And obviously, you guys have one more show as we record this podcast here in Cincinnati before you leave for Arizona, and then you have 6 or 7 more shows out in Goodyear.
Yeah, so we've got I think we have 6 shows in Goodyear, and then we have the one last show that will be live over at the BetMGM Sportsbook and Nation Kitchen and Bar the day before opening day on the 26th, on that Wednesday. That'll, of course, be a live show. Me and Jim, I'm sure we'll have a ton of guests. So still a couple of chances to see us down there live on location, one before we go to Goodyear and one right after we get back.
This is your 7th season of doing Reds baseball?
This will be my 7th year coming up. Can you believe that?
And it's hard. It's gone like that. I was still in Boston. You know how long it's been? Tommy, I was still in Boston when you began your Reds career.
That's
how
insane.
long it's been? Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah,
but it's gone very, very quickly. And I must tell you, there has not been a season of expectations for the Redlegs like this one in a long, long time. You would agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah. No, I would. I think you go back to the 2020 season. That was a year that the expectations were really high. The Reds kind of made a lot of splashes in free agency. And that one, I still think if you look back on that year, this team was really starting to hit its stride right before the shortened season came to an end. They ran into a buzzsaw in Atlanta. Turns out nobody could score against that pitching staff, even once you got to the postseason. It wasn't just the Reds. It took a couple of rounds before somebody finally cracked the code of that Braves pitching staff. I think that year had a chance to be really special. I think this year has a chance to be extremely special. And let's keep in mind, we get to watch a guy named Elly De La Cruz, who, by and large, I think if you ask anybody around the game that watches as much baseball as we do, you won't find a guy that's more exciting than him. And we get to watch him every night. We're very fortunate for that. And I can't wait to see how he continues to take another step forward in his development in his career this year. That, if nothing else, that is something that I am extremely excited about.
How do you think Tito's going to handle Elly?
I think he'll do an excellent job. I think it goes back to what you were talking about before. He's been around so many high-profile guys that he knows how to handle a guy with that much star power. And look, Elly's probably one of the easiest ones to handle that there is. He doesn't have a huge ego. I know that he's flashy on the field, but he's a pretty quiet, reserved guy off the field, and he wants to be great. Those are the easiest guys in the world to manage, I have to believe. If they want to be great, all you have to do is figure out how to get it out of them. And I think between him and his coaches, they'll be able to figure that out. And the sky's the limit for this guy. It's going to be so fun to watch him thrive under Tito. And it's going to be such a fun season.
One thing that told me that Tito was very serious about getting everybody on board was one of the first meetings he had after he got hired was going down to the Dominican, meeting with Ellie, meeting with Noel V. Marte, meeting with Jamer Candelario. And I just thought that was a kind of a watershed moment early in the offseason for the Reds.
No doubt. And I think it speaks to his character. He wants to make sure that everybody's pulling on the same side of the rope. And I think it's also a good way to win those guys over real quick. Anybody that talks to him is ready to play for him, like we talked about before. So it's he's going to have an incredibly positive impact on the young guys that are here. And I'm sure he will do an excellent job handling the veterans that are on this team as well to get the most out of everybody.
I know you are battling Mother Nature. I know you're battling some elements, and I appreciate you under the weather a little bit, taking time out to share with Reds Country your insight on the Code Reds podcast. Tommy, it's always a thrill and a pleasure talking with you.
Trags, appreciate you having me on, and anytime, happy to do it.
All right. He is Tommy Thrall, the one and only play-by-play voice of the Cincinnati Reds, entering his 7th season. Handling the play-by-play of the Redlegs. It should be a season unlike any other. We're really building up the expectations, but I think this team will prove worthy of it. We'll have to wait and see. And that proof in the pudding starts in Goodyear on February. What is it, Tommy? When do the pitchers and catchers report?
Pitchers and catchers report February 12th. How about that?
February 12th. Well, that's when the proof in the pudding begins in earnest. All right. He is Tommy Thrall of the Reds Radio Network. My name is Mike Petralia, Trags. Thanks for downloading this latest edition of the Code Reds podcast on the CLNS Media Network.